People that are here tonight have been at the court hearing, so one of the things that we'd like to propose is that instead of us going through a formal sort of presentation, since many of you have heard several formal presentations today, that we instead we field questions about the report. If people have questions about specific portions of the report, specific topics within the settlement agreement that we're working on, we can field those questions. And that is, do we want to then figure out how much time we want to leave for public comment?
Well, you guys, maybe you want to decide that, how you want to handle. Most of this is for you guys to give us feedback on the report or on this process, whatever. But, you know, rather than say everybody gets 2 minutes, what do you guys think you should do? How should we do this so that people aren't upset with us trying to control the whole thing? Go ahead.
One person talks, everyone listens, kind of thing. Maybe we can just all communicate as a whole since we've already all experienced most of today together.
Rather than come up and give a formal thing, you mean just stand up and talk or something? Okay.
Right, and again, if people have questions, we can try to answer them. If people have comments, that's fine too. I ask that everybody will all try to be respectful of each other and try not to personalize our comments, but really try to stick to questions and concerns about the content of the report and the settlement agreement.
One more thing, you need them to come up here if they're going to be heard, right, on the video? So that was your, okay, so if you do want to say something, I think you have to come up here. So we turned in the compliance report with all the ratings and grades, and there's another big outcomes report that's coming out very soon in the next week or so. And so you don't have that one yet, but we'll send that to you, or we'll post it.
Right, we'll post it publicly to make sure that everybody has access to it.
Were most of you at the meeting over there? How many of you were at the other meeting? Not all of you. Okay, so most of you were, 3/4 of you. Hopefully the other fourth have looked at the report, or feel free to comment about it.
Right, there's copies of the report at the back table, so people feel free to take a look at that. It looks like Philip has our first comment question.
Yes, I do. On page 3, for the record, my name is Philip Wolf, Executive Committee Director. Page 3, in regards to the grading. So as far as the grade goes, can you tell me please about the current grade and what does that mean? What does it look like from this page that I am indicating? Because so many of them are out of compliance or mostly compliant, partially compliant. In my opinion, it's either compliant or non-compliant. And so with them not all being compliant, how does that end up being graded?
I think we have, what we wanted to do is make sure that we could acknowledge where they've taken steps and are in partial compliance, but certainly there's more work to do. That's why we didn't just do not compliant or compliant. We wanted to be able to have a more of a continuum. Right, I think that gives more information to the public about what's going on.
As far as from what I can take away from from page 3, how are they graded? Like, is this a grade that we could give an A to or an F to, or what would be the opinion of the people at large? And if they were all obviously non-compliant, then it would be an F. So partially compliant or mostly compliant, what kind of grade is assigned to that?
I don't think we've linked it specifically to a grade. I mean, obviously, fully compliant would be, I guess, equivalent to an A, and out of compliance would be equivalent to an F, but I don't know that you could call partial compliance passing because they're not done. I mean, there's improvement that has to be made to come into compliance.
Okay, thank you. So in other words, we failed, and so it's not passing. And how can we change this as far as the goal and the timeline and deadlines as far as seeing this reform? And are we thinking 1 6-month term or another year, or how long will it take to close the gap?
First of all, it varies enormously by the task. So some of these things are done, they've gotten substantial compliance because they did the actual a task that was listed in the settlement agreement as required by law. And so, assigning a person to be the inspector or the compliance officer, they've done that, you check the box. Some of those are easier to achieve. Others are going to take years, frankly, and we kind of implied that they're building new data systems, their record systems are in part questionable, but they've done a lot of work, they've made a lot of progress in some areas. So that's why it's a graded partial compliance, is they've made significant progress, but they still haven't received full compliance because there's still something missing. And it varies. The Portland contract is arranged for it. The settlement agreement is a 5-year thing right now. So in 2020, is it, or something like that? There hopefully will be full compliance on most of these things. Compared to other cities, I have to be honest. A number of other cities don't achieve compliance within that time period. It has taken Los Angeles and Detroit, lots of different cities, 10 years. I don't think that's going to happen in Portland, but you just don't know. There could be some areas that they get stuck on.
Okay, and so since you're from, last question, thank you. Since you're from Chicago, and I promise this all comes together, and you have to travel back and forth, how do you keep up with making sure that the investigators or the compliance folks are keeping up with their part of what they're supposed to do? And what, as COAB, what can we do to help increase that ability?
Well, first of all, we travel here every month, and Tom is full-time working on this. And we have people working here as well in the COCL office. And this is an electronic world, so we're constantly requesting records and reports, and we have an arrangement where we get these files. So there's a lot that goes on at that level. We surveyed all the officers or a good chunk of them in the Portland Police Bureau without being here. We did it electronically. So, but I didn't answer the second part. I think that we've always viewed you guys as giving us ideas and advice on things that were important. Early on, the community and the COAB pushed for this 48-hour rule, for example, that it be eliminated. And we heard that. We looked into it through other research, and we discovered that this doesn't fit with our knowledge of police research and research about witnesses and all of that. And so we quickly, in the first report, recommended that be eliminated, as one example.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Philip.
Hi, my name's Pat Adams, concerned citizen. So I read this report, not all of it, some of it, and I've read your previous ones. And I find the format really difficult. And I would say your partial compliance rating has a lot to do with that. Because say, for instance, they've done 10%, that's partial. Say they've done 90, that's partial. And so we're going to sit around and wait till 5 years to see if they turn green. And to me, that's not good project management. Okay. So I'm a project management guy. I spend a lot of time doing that. Sure. And here's what I would say is on each one of these topics, there are tasks that need to be done. And we could ask the people that need to do it, what do you intend to do between now and the next meeting? All right? What's your intention? And then we come to the next meeting, we look at it and we say, what did you do? Yeah. Right? And then we ask them, okay, now, what are you going to do for the next time? And so we have an idea about the incremental progress. What happened between last time and this time? And primarily, not what did we tell you to do, but what did you agree to do? Yeah. And if they come in here and anybody says, oh, I don't agree to do anything, then we shouldn't be surprised when we come around the next time and they haven't done anything.
One thing
Yeah, go ahead.
that we have talked a little bit about is working on a feedback loop so we can get a more formal response to even the recommendations that we make when we go through kind of what we're rating for compliance. We make some recommendations, and if we can work on getting a more formal response from the city in terms of their response to the recommendations, being, okay, we can do X, Y, and Z before next time or whatever, that may be a way of tracking that.
Well, I agree with you, Pat, what you're saying, but I think we also are doing that to some extent. We didn't just come up with ratings and just kind of make them up. So I can give you many examples, but one is the Regents records keeping system that they have. It's problematic in a lot of ways, and we pointed that out 6 months ago. And we met with all their data people around a big table, and we said exactly what you said. What are you guys going to do to fix this? First of all, I said, we want a report from you that shows us all the problems you're having and what you're planning to do about it and who's going to do it. And we got that report, and that was why I mentioned today, out of 14 problems on this Excel sheet, they've addressed 8 of them, I think. Is that what I said? I can't remember. And then, and they had that huge backlog of 17,000 cases. They got that down to 1,000. They're going to finish it by next year. So that's exactly what you're saying, I think. So, but there's still partial compliance. I mean,
Right, so does that say that in here? Do I know that actually not sometime back, they started that, but actually 6 months ago or whatever, they said, we'll do that, and here it is. And do we know what they're gonna do in the next 6 months? I mean, I know this is nitpicky,
No,
but if you're running a project,
yeah.
this is how you get it.
I think there's some areas where you're proposing that we haven't done that probably we could. I think that's a good idea. In most areas we have. But the other thing is that, in answer to your question, some of the things that you're saying, are they in our report? They're not in this report. Some of them are in the other report. Like, because the example I just gave was about data systems and measurement, and have they created, the settlement agreement says they have to create these systems to manage force, to manage mental health, et cetera. And that one's in our outcomes report, which is more data-driven and more about systems. And so that one will be out in the next week or so.
I'd really like to see all that in a single report, so when we're looking at how they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, that's good, but again, it's like, here, can we see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that we
Okay.
really know. And again, what are they, the last thing I'll say is
Yeah.
that running a project management system, when you get tasks like this, there's always a who's responsible.
Yeah,
And I don't
yeah.
see that here,
Yeah.
and I would like to see that too. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, come on up.
Thanks for all your hard work today.
Thank you.
Quite a long day in court, huh?
Yeah, it was good, though.
I thought some progress was made. So I'm curious on a couple of points.
Yeah.
In terms of some of the metrics that you all have talked about, I've heard somewhere between the number of 100 or 500 or 1,000. I'm familiar with some of those sorts of things, but of course I'm not a PhD student, I'm only a master's student. I've done some research in command and control type structures or organizations. A lot of the change, research has shown, a lot of the change happens according to the message that's being really promoted from the top.
Yeah.
Do any of your metrics reflect that? Do any of your data points reflect that? And if so, how is that expressed specifically within the compliance report? That's my first question.
Okay, I think in terms of looking at the messages coming from leadership, we certainly look at that in the organizational survey. We ask questions about that and the messages that PPB members are getting from their leadership in terms of elements of the settlement agreement. That's something we've also touched upon in focus groups with officers, and so we're looking at it there. the difficulty is some of it isn't something that's explicitly tied to a paragraph in the settlement agreement. So it's important to it as sort of the context of making reform happen.
It's the driver.
Right.
It's the cultural driver.
Right, and looking at how to get those shifts to happen, and we've done a lot of talking with PPB about really how to get reform to happen and what type of leadership is needed, what type of messaging, and then what type of support members need to really push that along. But certainly we are tracking that over time with some of the different types of surveys and data collection that we do.
So I just want to clarify what I'm hearing. So are you expressing that specific messages are occurring from the, whatever command and control, whether that's Chief Marshman or the deputies, or whether that's at roll call, or
Well, we don't know always where it's coming from, but
or at the sergeant level? Right, so in other words, how can you have data with fidelity, right, if it's not consistent, right? So here's the
Yeah.
master student coming in.
sure. Okay, I'll answer that.
Okay.
First of all, a lot of our survey questions, I've tested them in 100 American cities, so I know that some of them work. And we have nice variation across cities, so I can validate the questions. We added a lot of new questions in Portland as well around mental health and all of that. And as Amy kind of pointed out there, we do get their attitudes and views about responding to mental health cases, mental crisis cases, and whether they think that's part of their job or not. And there's lots of questions like that. There's also questions about, as I was saying earlier, they also need to, just like the community here and tonight needs to feel part of the process or it doesn't work.
Right, procedural justice.
Yeah, so there's internal, I call it organizational justice.
Right.
And same thing internally. And we have questions on the survey like, how often does the leadership, when an important change comes that affects your job, how often do they seek your input? Or how often do they explain,
Okay.
or how often do they explain the reasons to you?
All right.
And
Okay, because that's
yeah.
critical in
And,
terms of
and-
fair process.
yeah, fair process. And you'd be shocked. I mean, well, you probably wouldn't, but the numbers are huge. No one seeks my input. So under the new leadership, we hope that that's more important. And also, we have questions directly about the settlement agreement. The settlement agreement's a good thing, or I forget how do we word that, Tom, something like that.
Well, and I think one of your questions was how does it get put into this compliance report? On page 38, we talk about, for paragraph 102, when we observed the, I forget what training was
This
this?
ECIT refresher.
The ECIT refresher, we noticed kind of the message that this is something DOJ is making us do, and we put it into our compliance report right there. When we identify it, we're gonna say, no, this is the wrong messaging. Also on page 51, at the bottom.
So it's explicitly,
At the bottom part of the EIS, we say the messaging around EIS is extremely important. Our survey shows that people do not have the confidence in the system. So when we've identified it as it relates to specific paragraphs, we have identified it in those specific paragraphs. And then when we see it systematically and organizationally, that's when we're really flushing it out into our outcomes assessment.
and that was page 38, paragraph 102?
38, and that's for paragraph 102, and then also page 51, which it's the last paragraph for paragraph 116, 117.
And when our outcomes report comes out, you'll also be able to look at, we have responses to those questions, and it's about, the perception of leadership messaging, perception of their supervisors as well, and supporting them, as well as their own opinions about some of the reforms, training. So there's a lot of information there as well. So we are really kind of looking at that because we understand that's really important, that any change that comes down, there has to be a lot of work to make sure that it becomes institutionalized within the organization.
The way I understand it, I mean, much of the change that's being asked to happen is really based on a paradigm of community-based participation within that organization, except that it's not community-driven, right? It's driven from the top, which I'm sort of curious how that works out I don't know if that's,
I-
maybe that's research I need to do independently of being involved in COAB
Yeah.
as a sort of
I-
curiosity, but I'm wondering if that's in any way expressed through specific metrics within the compliance report.
Yeah. Well, I think I understand what you're saying, but I don't think they're incompatible. I think that if you have a police chief who's community-oriented and who believes in community policing,
Okay, huge premise.
yeah, I know. Well, yeah, we'll see this time around.
No, I believe
Yeah.
in Marshman, I do.
Yeah, but so that you message that down through the chain of command onto the streets, that this is what we value. And we also on our survey ask questions about their views of the community. And, do they think that, and their views of force and how it should be used and stuff like that. So, but I think you can, yes, you want the community input, you want it community, but you also want in an organization, this bottom up, just like in the community, you want participatory management, right? You want-
That's what I'm talking
Yeah,
about. All right.
so we ask those
Participatory
kinds of
management,
questions.
okay.
Whether they
All
do
right.
that or not is up to them, but we'll.
Okay, so
But
the
when they
question-
see
We're
these-
watching. I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
when they know they're being
Right.
judged in a sense by these
Right.
questions, because that's what I
Measured.
was saying. Right, how often do we have input and all
Right.
that kind of stuff, and our, and also the discipline. Right now, I tried to say that earlier at the meeting, and how strong are you for or against the police? I'm telling you that, if everyone inside the organization feels they're just being attacked by the national media, the local media, the community
Yeah.
activists, they circle the wagons, they
Sure.
hunker down until the storm passes,
It's
the
an
new chief.
identity.
Yeah, and,
They're protecting
I'm
it.
not gonna do jack. I'm
Yeah,
just gonna
yeah.
go in my car, respond to calls I have to take.
Right.
And so you don't want that either, right? Because we're talking about reform now. We're talking about how do you get the guys
Right.
on and women on the streets?
How do you evolve to that
Yeah.
next stage
Yeah.
in that pendulum swing?
Yeah, so I just want people to be sensitive to that, and that we're trying to
I'm
measure that.
sensitive.
Yeah, and that we have to,
I wouldn't
regardless.
still be on COAB if I wasn't. sensitive.
And there's certainly members of PPB that perhaps don't welcome they don't love being scrutinized, but they do welcome the reforms because they do want to be a better bureau.
Sure.
So certainly,
Who doesn't want to be, regarded in a more favorable fashion?
well, some of them
Favorable
actually
part.
want to do the right thing too, and
yeah,
want to be
yeah.
more effective in the job that they do. I mean, I don't think we can forget that many of them really want to go out and do a good job. It's figuring out, how to do that in the context that they're in and making sure that the organization can support them in doing that.
Right. I think that's key too, that the latter, the object of your sentence, but, okay. So then my other question is based on this idea of knowledge. I'm not trying to attack anybody's work. I just sort of want us to be aware of the fact that the people that are being affected aren't at the table. And despite the fact, and I know how it happens, despite the fact that we call these focus groups to happen, right? The fact of the matter is, because we come from this organizational and academic background, we're asking for specific types of sophistication. That says, okay, well, this is knowledge here. But since these people, for instance, in the focus groups that were called by whomever,
Yeah,
and I'm not trying to put you all down.
no,
I'm
go
not here
ahead,
to
be
attack.
critical, we're used to it.
Well, I'm not here to attack. That's not
that's
my
right.
style.
I know.
When you say, okay, well, we want gays and lesbians and blacks and Latinos and Latinas and, no, we don't want immigrants, right, because they can't come to the table. I mean, once you said, well, I know you'll bring the Latins, right? Yeah, you said it it doesn't matter. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is, don't look too perplexed, but it's the reality I lived with being on the COAB. My point is this, it's about knowledge. So who says what knowledge is actually legitimate?
Yeah, well, you're asking, are you asking, can I reword that and tell me if I'm describing it right? That you're saying whose voice matters in this decision? Or when we're talking about the community, like what is community? Is that what you're?
I'm real clear about what community is.
Okay.
Community are the people that don't feel comfortable coming here, Community are people that can't come here,
Okay, so they're all part of it.
or they're scared to come here. And, try as I might to help those communities get voice, I didn't do such a great job.
Are you, I mean,
'Cause
But
the-
they're creating knowledge, so, I mean, what knowledge are we talking about then, if it's not the knowledge?
of
I
lived
can't
experience?
I can't speak for them, obviously.
Right.
I would never pretend to be in that position.
Are you suggesting that maybe the focus groups weren't the appropriate format to get that feedback?
No, I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is that I wonder if there were other areas in Portland that could have been tapped, that would have more deeply
Yeah.
or more significantly informed those data points and units that I think propels R&W's work.
Were you part of the community
was-
engagement?
I was out of town on the East Coast
Okay,
doing master.
because I mean, I wasn't directly involved in that subcommittee, but our team did work
Well-
with that subcommittee to start working on developing those questions and kind of how to target. But I agree, we probably didn't get every pocket, and certainly that's room to continue working on and making sure that we get out there and get that input.
Right, and so one of the big words that has been missing in a lot of ways, in my view, is just the word mental health or mental illness. I came on to the COAB and I fully expressed and was open about being diagnosed with a SMI. Unfortunately, a lot of times I think people tended to go with that sort of stereotype or generalization and say, well, not much knowledge that you have to offer is truly legitimate, when in fact, it's based on all of the reading
Right.
that I've done in my life and the experiences that I've had,
Yeah.
which is significant. Be that as it may, I think it would behoove Rosenbaum and Watson and your work in the academics, feudal system as it is, to actually get the views of those that are mentally ill. People that are willing to say, yeah, I'm mentally ill. These are the issues that happen and have happened in the last 2 years with respect to the PPB. So that way, that data is real data. I'm not saying the data you have is false, and certainly all the knowledge that I have isn't complete.
Well, and certainly that's something, there were focus groups that did focus on that issue with people with lived experience of mental illness. I believe there were family members included in some of those as well. That doesn't mean that we should be done saying we got all the input that we
Okay.
need and we should
That's
move on.
important for me to hear.
And certainly we've been working with the city. Chief Marshman is, kind of strongly considering doing some type of contact survey and sort of so asking people that have had contact with Bureau members about that experience. And one piece of that would be going and really talking to people that have had mental health related contacts and getting that feedback as well. So the focus groups are not the end of getting that input. And certainly working with people like yourself and other members of the COAB and other members of the community to get input on the best way to go about really reaching folks that have a lot that we can learn from.
Right.
And we,
That's good to hear.
That's a really important project.
that's
I think
critical.
if they do that, that's fantastic, and we would be happy to help them because we've done those in other cities. But I think we're trying to take the systematic kind of bigger picture things that we can do. We survey all the officers. We're involved in, and you guys were involved in developing the citywide survey. That was done a year ago. There's one starting right now again.
So when you say the systematic view,
Well, it's
so
rather.
how does that differentiate from what Dr. Watson just said?
Well, it isn't different in that
Okay.
we do the contact survey. If the Portland Police Bureau does that, would also be systematic. Would be about all encounters or some version
Right,
of
okay,
encounters with
okay,
the
right.
Portland Police Bureau.
That's
So
understandable.
bigger data, bigger numbers. The qualitative work, which we've been helping in the COAB, was the subcommittee. COAB deserves the credit for a lot of that. We're working with Amy Ruiz. Where are you, Amy? Are you here? Or
She's off
She's
in the-
over there,
behind
yeah.
the column.
Yeah, her and Mandy and others deserve credit for
Yeah.
helping with that. But and the city hired someone to help do that. But I personally, we haven't really had a chance to talk about this, but assuming that the COCL and the COAB become separate, we would envision that the COAB would continue the more qualitative messaging from the community finding out how various elements of the community feel, not just coming to the meeting themselves, but reaching out and sharing that with us, because that would be part of what we still want to hear, but we just don't want to have to, we don't want to run your affairs. You don't want us to run your affairs. And we would spend more of our time on the compliance work, but we were into these larger data sets, like I'm saying. So we still, because it's all relevant. It's how are they doing in impacting these various groups?
Right.
So, I mean, that we care about that bottom line.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your input and your work.
Uh-oh. I have one already, I think, yeah.
Yeah, uh-oh. Well, you've already read it, so.
Yeah.
No surprises for you. No, I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch, and I just wanted to read some portions of our comments that we sent in. They're 9 pages long, and they're up on our website, but the link isn't on the website yet, so we'll fix that soon. There's a lot of other stuff going on, so it was very hard for us to get through your document. First of all, paragraph 137 that has to do with the discipline guide. There was a comment made at the very end of the hearing with Judge Simons that the discipline guide being approved by the PPA allows us to move forward and fire officers and move forward with this whole agreement. But the agreement that was signed, that this council voted into place, specifically says the discipline guide grievance had to do with whether officers were fired for untruthfulness, and that they would be given the chance to have a mitigation hearing if they're fired for untruthfulness, which doesn't deal with deadly force or any of the things the community's more concerned about, even though untruthfulness is high on our list. Police officers have in the past been fired for lying, cheating, stealing, and sexual misconduct, but not for the use of force. And the other thing that document said is that the union reserves the right to file a grievance about any other part of the things that they dropped the grievances about. So we could still have a grievance filed about the discipline guide. So I just want to make sure that we set the record straight about that. So we, like I said, we did this very long analysis of your document. We appreciate all the work that you put into it. Obviously, we disagree with you on a lot of things. One of the things that we're very concerned about is that last time you did a report saying that the Bureau shouldn't wait 3 to 5 hours before issuing communication restriction orders after a shooting so that officers won't talk to each other. Witnesses involves officers, and we in the community call that getting their stories straight. And this time you're saying that it's reasonable for them to use 2 to 6 hours to do that because the detectives don't show up on the scene. That's just ridiculous. The officers should not be talking to each other and getting their stories straight after a shooting incident. I think that, that's a kind of a big reversal from you to take the opposite position there. So if it needs to be somebody other than the detectives who issue it, somebody has to tell them not to talk to each other about what happened. Then we also noticed that you admitted that you didn't review the documents to see that all the use of force complaints were investigated. And last time you found one case that wasn't investigated. I mentioned in the court that the DOJ found that Internal Affairs stopped investigating a case where an officer dragged a bicycle under a patrol car because Commander Dave Hendry said the officer ramming the bicyclist was not a use of deadly force. That is shocking. That shocks the conscience.
That's in their report, right?
That's in the DOJ's
Okay,
report,
just wanted
not your report. I mean, you and I talked a little bit before, Dr. Rosenbaum, that you don't necessarily go into individual cases, but I think, as we also talked about, individual cases can be very illustrative of what the Bureau is doing, and that's shocking. The only incident this year where the officers have shot anybody, they didn't hit him, but your report reveals that a third officer was listed as an involved officer. They weren't interviewed. That's also very concerning. But you said he or she wasn't interviewed. Is that because you don't know the gender, or you're not allowed to say the gender? I don't understand why we wouldn't get to know the gender of the officer that was involved.
This goes back to our long-running battle with you about whether we should put everybody's name in the...
But a name isn't a gender isn't a name.
No, it just narrows it down. If it's a female, it really narrows it down.
For the record, this is just very silly. I mean, if anybody's seen the latest Police Review Board report, we played a game called Police Review Board Report Mad Libs because they have so many redactions in there. We just started throwing in random things like Kim Kardashian in there because we have no idea what they're talking about. They blot out gender pronouns. They blot out districts. You know, I mean, it's just ridiculous.
I just want to go on the record, though. I know Dan and I, we've gone back and forth over this over time. For the I just want people to know his position that we should put names of everybody in our reports. I have argued against that. We have argued against that because although we did agree on a compromise, which is listing the names of ranking people that are heads of various bureaus that we talk to. But the other, when you start going down the chain of command, though, when you talk to a sergeant or somebody, they're going to tell us stuff about the organization that we will not get if we start calling them out. We're going to get nothing. And I've learned that over a long time.
Well, that's true. But again, you didn't list Acting Chief Henderson in that list, and she's the one that told you that she didn't want to reschedule the meeting with the COAB that is required by the settlement agreement. It's another thing that was found out of compliance that nobody really talked about today.
Yeah, that was an oversight. We'll correct.
Okay. So I have a bunch of questions I didn't have time to send to you also, just so you know, so I'll be doing a follow-up on that. You mentioned in the courtroom about, I think the DOJ, somebody mentioned in the courtroom about officers being asked to do walkthroughs, and because they were asked to do it, that's in compliance, but you found that it was only partial rating because none of them have done it. And I want to applaud you for that. I think the DOJ is wrong on that one.
Thank you.
So the PPB said that they didn't think that they had to write a report if somebody redirect somebody by grabbing them by the arm. Okay, because it's not considered force. And you agreed because they wouldn't have to write a force report. But it also says that if an escort hold, such as that, is on a person with mental health issues, it gets reported to professional standards. So that's inconsistent reporting of something that can be considered force. And also we noted, if a civilian touched an officer on the elbow and it was unwanted, that would be considered assault or harassment. So especially because somebody was saying that throwing a cup of water is harassment. I think it's much worse when you're touched by somebody and there's not necessarily a reason for it. That should be considered use of force. And again, I know you're not going to necessarily agree with this part, but the disruptions that happened at the COAB meetings were fed by actions from your office. So actions such as squashing the COAB's efforts to discuss certain topics, arguing with community members about the content of their testimony, and I would add often when I was lined up and to testify, people were being argued with and I didn't get my chance to come before the microphone because the COCL team was arguing with the people in front of me. Creating arbitrary rules about where a video camera should be at public meetings. These are the very things that we're talking about that fuel that anger, that causes the things that happen. So whether or not you continue to be in charge of the COAB, just take some responsibility for those things that happen, because that's what led to the outreach, the outcry.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I think to some extent you're correct, that there were things that could have been done differently. Some of those things I didn't agree with completely, but you have to respect people's authority in those positions to do those things. Now, in general, I agree with the way things were handled. And I guess I want to push back a little bit on this, Dan, because you and I both know that the reasons for unrest are deeper than the COAB or the COCL, and that some people, and by the mere fact that not just our meetings were disrupted, but many meetings around town, that implies that it wasn't necessarily the way we handled the meeting, unless you're going to argue that the meetings are all handled that way.
Yes, I would argue
Okay.
that. I would definitely argue that.
And I can't challenge that. But we did our best, and I think the other side of that we want to recognize is, this idea that we were trying to control the COAB and keep them from meeting and everything. We were just trying to keep people who came to us, who are members of the COAB and members of the community, and said they felt unsafe, they didn't want to go anymore. We were trying to create an environment where they could function and come to the meeting. And there was one I think we had to cancel. I've forgotten all the details. It's all written down. You guys know that better than I do.
But I'll give you an example. This room
Yeah.
is used by the Citizen Review Committee, not Citizens Review, the Citizen Review Committee, which you still don't have in your abbreviations, and you still haven't attended a hearing by the CRC in 2 years. Their meetings were disrupted for a little while. We sat down as a community, talked about ground rules that everybody could agree on, and since then things have been pretty mellow. The problem was that the ground rules that you tried to use to protect the people who felt scared were decided without any input from the community. So it's the same thing you're saying about the city. If you get buy-in, if they can be part of the process, then maybe everybody will work together. But-
I don't disagree with that.
Okay.
And I don't think it was handled perfectly. We're all human. And I think, it could have been done better, but, there were also a bunch of bylaws that were created by the community, by the COAB, and Kathleen was trying to enforce some of those rules. And, some of them were pretty strict, some were debatable, like we're agreeing, but others were just an attempt to keep order. And I think, people have the right to protest, and sometimes people wanted to just protest, and, they, you can't.
Well, yeah, I think that,
Yeah,
I completely support that remark. I mean, it's coming from somewhere.
yeah, I agree.
All right, so I just want to run through a few more things. I know it's been a long day. I'm about to collapse, but
Yeah, we are too.
you noticed that the Bureau never finished its annual report until July, and that they forgot to post it online. The DOJ, when they brought it to their attention, they finally posted it a couple of weeks ago. The cover photo is of a young girl petting a police dog, and my offhand comment is, I wonder if that's the police dog that bit Aaron Campbell after he was shot. It's very offensive.
Yeah.
That an animal that's used in it's no fault of the animals because they were trained to do it, but an animal that's used to tear apart community members physically is being seen as a cute little symbol of the Bureau. And this is the same kind of public relations garbage that the city tried to pull with that video in the courtroom. Just disrespectful of the community members who've been harmed.
We hear what you're saying.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your active listening. The BHU Advisory Committee, I talked about this too in the court, has their recommendations implemented, has feedback from the Bureau. I don't know. I sort of heard you saying, implying that at least, that the city's not always getting back to you about your recommendations to them. Is that what you were saying a minute
Pull
ago?
the Fifth Amendment on that one. No.
So you plead the Fifth?
No. No, Tom just said that. No, we have, and maybe it's our fault, I don't know, but we did not set up a environment where we insisted on feedback the way we kind of do with the community. And, we've gotten some feedback of inaccuracies in the report. We have gotten feedback. And DOJ, we get feedback from them sometimes.
Yeah, well, I've seen
yeah.
I do appreciate that you go through all the feedback for reports and respond to them. I think it was not a good move on your part when the COAB, which you were the chair of, said, here are the paragraphs we think are in the wrong, you were wrong about. And you said, well, you weren't specific enough. I mean, you could sit down with them and say, let's go over these paragraphs. What do you think is wrong?
Well, we can do that. I mean, I again, this is a point raised earlier. I still going to defend ourselves on that because we put a lot of work into this stuff with all these interviews and data points and analysis and so they're not just, I think we'll give them a partial compliance this time. It's very thought out and it's based on data. And so when people come into the meeting and say, you guys are way too lenient on the Portland Police Bureau and have no specific reasons about why. We have our data. You come with your data if you really believe that.
Well, you should.
So the burden is on the community member who's challenging our rating, I think, to
Except
say,
that-
here's the data I'm
Except
based.
that it's your board and you're the chair of that board. Okay, I think it's different when you're talking about.
But maybe we didn't handle it well. You're saying we just cut off communication, or
Yeah, I think you should have asked them what they meant.
we
And
did.
maybe they-
I
'cause-
remember the record will reflect that we sat in that group, and I said, I disagree. What do you?
Okay. Well, anyway, we also, in a footnote, suggested that, and this goes back to something I think Pat was saying, that you have a considerable compliance level, so that it's high. That's it. You have a minimal, you have
Right.
partial, you
Right.
have a considerable, and then you have a substantial. Because then that
And you like that.
I would like another tier.
You like that better than the DOJ system.
Oh yeah, your system is better than DOJ's because
Yeah.
you have one more level.
Let the record
You have the minimal. We found that 17 of ratings by the DOJ were higher than yours, and 14 of yours were higher than theirs. So obviously, it's very subjective. You say you have all this data to support your findings, but it's obviously subjective.
Well,
We
so-
look at data differently.
Yeah, we look at data a little bit differently, and this is a bit of an issue. We are trying to coordinate more with them, so there isn't two separate systems, but we are independent, but I think the answer to that is if you really look at it carefully, and we actually want to do this, you'll probably see that, again, there are gradations. They're not, yes and no. They're not compliance, non-compliance. And they have a different scale than we do, as we just talked about. So, but we're generally in the same direction. Ours is partial, theirs is whatever, but it's like, you will find, I bet you, of all those differences, this many that are worth debating.
Well, except that when they say substantial compliance, or you say substantial compliance, that city's going to sit down and say, okay, that one's done. Green light, we're good.
Well, it's an agreement.
There's
That's
also-
not one of the disagreements that you just listed.
There's also an ongoing obligation. So when you look at the DOJ's report card, it'll say substantial compliance, ongoing obligation. We
Right.
feel that that's kind of understood, that once you hit it, you can't just back off of it. We feel the ongoing compliance is.
Right. Okay, well, I know other people are here who want to talk. I just want to add one more thing right now, and if there's more time, I'll come back later. But, we appreciate that you keep asking the city to put in the police review board's city code the fact that they can send cases back for more investigation. Now, you never did address the fact that they did that, even though we called that to your attention. The amendments to that city code that the IPR put forward do not include that, and I still don't know why. And for anybody who's going to be here tomorrow morning, 10:30 in the morning, the city council is going to induct presumably 13 new members to the police review board, which is the only chance we get to see them in public because their meetings are held behind closed doors. So I just want to make sure people know that.
Well, Dan, I just want to thank you. Your work is very thorough, very impressive, and we do listen to you. I think you know that, and we make corrections and we respond.
Listen to us sometimes.
No, absolutely.
We listen, we don't always agree.
We don't always agree, but most of the time we do, actually.
I appreciate it.
So I don't. I just want you to know how much we appreciate all of the work that you do. Yeah, Philip.
Two things just occurred to me while you were talking a moment ago. Pardon. Okay, I'll sit right here. I was just wondering, well, okay, so let me try to use some analogy. How dismantled is the police culture in PPP? Like, how can we, there's one way you can dismantle police culture is, someone can walk in with a loaded vest of explosives and then they just go in and blow up PPP. So what I'm thinking is of a drastic reform and change. So with COCL working with PPP and the COAB working with the community, what we can do is have both sides exchange information and come together in a meeting, and somehow it can be successful, because what I've noticed is that COAB has a good relationship with the community and the COCL has a relationship with the PPB. And so what we could do is what has happened is we've come to heads, and so I'm wondering if there's a way where they could come together and, one side could say, here's what we agree, here's what the work we've done, and come to some sort of an agreement in the middle. Because there's a time where, you can have a work group or a focus group where a couple of COAB members can go and attend that meeting, that focus group that you're holding, and then bring our information that we collect back to the COAB. And so let's say there's another focus group or a work group that someone from the COAB can attend, because the COAB hasn't really been on the forefront and talking with the PPB. It's been mostly within the COCL's hands, and what I think that is the way that we can demolish some barriers is by going in and providing our input. And the other thing I was going to say is that perhaps the settlement agreement says that there's a minimum of 2 years, which means that it could go longer to 3 or 4 years if certain things have not been completed. And if that is the case, what does that mean for COCL and for your work involved? And what do you envision your future involved in this? Just wondering.
You want me to start? Okay. Well, the first question about the relationship, we certainly are open, very much so, to having a long-term relationship with the COAB, because that's, as I said earlier today, we have an enormous respect for community engagement. And also, like you said, you have relationships with the community that we don't have in some areas, and we could learn a lot about how the police out on the streets are treating people. We will have some other systematic ways of finding that out, but we would like to know how the community feels about certain things that are new changes, new innovations, new policies, new programs, new community outreach efforts by the police. Our work, we have a fairly good relationship with the PPB, but this goes back to Dan Handelman in a way. I want to
Clearly.
just like the community says our compliance ratings are too high, the PPB and the city have told us they're too low. So I guess we're doing a good job. But anyway, so we get caught in the middle on that. But my point is, we don't have a love fest going with them, but we do get along with them. They respect us, and we will continue to work with them. I think our work, we're trying to focus in the future on the compliance work. Really determining, have they set up all these systems they need to set up, and how can we help them set them up? We helped design the original auditing system for them for Force, and it was a back and forth, battling back and forth to get it to where it would work. And so we see the COAB and your guys as the also to advise us at times when we assume that we will continue to report to you on our reports like we are now, and that relationship we hope continues. Our plan, we're not thinking beyond a couple more years on this thing. We can't think that far ahead, but we do see it. I think Judge Simon recognized today that this is going to take time. It's like, as I said before, it's like turning around an ocean liner. It's not a speedboat. And knowing that now the police culture, you started by talking about that. Again, it goes back to you attack that problem from all fronts, but it's not just leadership, as we talked about earlier, and organizational change, but there has to be engagement with the community in new ways. And frankly, Portland Police Bureau has a bunch of programs right now that are pretty impressive. And it's hard to put this in context because we see a lot of different cities. And there's a number of things they're doing right out here. There's still things that we think they could improve on. And you guys are the experts on what they can improve on. But we have, Philip, we have every desire to work with you guys. And I just wanted to, I said it in my talk today, I'll say it again. There's a distrust in Portland among all the parties that is pretty severe. And, all of us who, know these things from our own personal lives and from our research, that trust is broken. Trust is something you earn. It's not something you just hand to somebody. And, but I think that there needs to be a trusting relationship with us. I'll stop talking. You go ahead and respond.
Right. Trust is, sorry, I just feel like you were taking trust lightly. And I speak for the community in the Pulse and the information that I've gathered in my own research and in my own personal experience as well. With the chief being appointed, this chief had a history of violence and has a history of things that he shouldn't have been brought forward and promoted for that. And now they're trying to come forward with something that they think they can win our trust with, which is impossible. They already selected somebody. They had a son up against the wall, and it's just, took somebody by the throat. That's excessive use, and that's something that, you can't earn trust back from that. I mean, if you look at from the community's perspective, it's just confusing why they would even choose that person. And then, of course, the mayor has something going on with the PPA, and I don't know if you had any knowledge of the PPA negotiations before we found out. Did you know that they were negotiating behind closed doors?
No. But,
Well, the point
but you
is,
know
though,
what, I'm also
that
not
they
going,
had some negotiations going on and behind closed doors for the past year, and then we just found out moments before that everything's already been decided upon. So that loses trust. That is not a way to gain trust. And
I totally,
Larry is a former police chief, had a shooting happen. He used his weapon, and it was discharged. They did not report it immediately, and then eventually, after some time frame, there was a time lapse, and eventually they had to report what happened. It's creepy. You know what I mean?
yeah. But, you know, we pointed that out.
And I've read articles as well.
We pointed that out in our work, that we think what happened with Chief O'Day was a serious breach of trust with the community and with the department. I
That's
don't know if it
right.
was an accident or
And
what,
how
but
do you earn trust back from something like that?
you don't. But on the other hand, I'm gonna,
We gotta
I
trust
think,
that if they resign, if we
yeah,
would respect
but-
them from there, we would respect their resignation. So that's my.
but wait, Philip, before you disappear, well, I can talk to him from there. I appreciate what you're saying about,
I didn't realize you had a follow-up question.
I appreciate what you're saying about the impact of Chief O'Day's behavior on the department and on the accountability policies. What you're saying about the new chief, though, I mean, I personally don't know much about what happened, but it seems like we're taking an individual's behavior from years ago. We've all done things wrong in our lives. And, I mean, how long are we going to hold them responsible for that?
Parents, okay, pardon. Parents don't choke their children. They don't throw their children up against the wall and then say, sorry, I had a bad moment. I mean, come on. That
Well-
explains someone's personality. And when I read that statement, I was shocked. I felt sick to my stomach because I shook the man's hand. That was the same hand that choked his own son. I'm sorry.
Well,
Come on.
well, I'm not that judgmental. I've had adolescent children. I didn't choke them, but I wanted to.
Yeah, so you have an appointment, you have a perspective, and I just want you to feel.
Unless you,
I'm not
yeah.
asking you to support or say, that's something against it, but at least acknowledge where I'm coming from. I'm not asking you to take a side. What I'm asking you to do is realize what I'm saying is something that can cause unrest and distrust.
I can see that. I would rather judge someone, though, on their 20 years of police work and what they've done in the department, locally, nationally, and I've looked at that guy's record, and it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, because they kept it a secret.
No, I mean, I'm talking about his work record.
Yes, so that wouldn't affect his work record. They kept it a secret.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna fight about this, but I hear what you're saying. Again, I think we have to have some compassion for people at times.
Right, and if you see, this is something that can cause community unrest, and the community obviously has feelings on this. And I just want you to go home tonight and think about, okay, what does this mean, and why is it such a big deal? Why is it so atrocious that we are a part of a national disgrace? If we fail our job as a COAB, America and other cities, it feels like there's no chance of police reform if we can't get this right. This has got to happen here so we can make an improvement and all over the nation. It's a
Right.
national disgrace that's happening in this country.
So you're gonna judge this person on this one incident
Yes,
rather than on his career?
yes.
Okay, well, let's leave it at that, because I don't agree with that.
Well, it's not necessarily that. Listen, his good performance on the job does not automatically buy my trust. So, the fact that he had made mistakes and has not paid for his crime, let's say someone like me discharges my weapon and then I don't say anything about it. And then later on I come clean, I'm still going to be arrested just as I were the same day if it had happened and if I had shot my friend. Let's say I shot my friend.
Now we're
a
going
friend of-
from
another
choking
friend
to shooting.
of mine. If someone were to keep that secret knowingly, they would also be arrested. So listen, the police they have no criminal accountability. They're covering for each other. And even if eventually they improved or they had better behavior. If a different officer saw an officer get away with some kind of a crime like that, that second officer would do the same thing and can get away with it, knowing that that's police culture and knowing that that's feeding into it. And so it can only expand on the negative, and I just want to see the big picture. Yes, he's done a great work with his career, but it does not mean he can buy my trust just because he's been good in his career, because in the back of my mind, I know what he did, and I grew up as a survivor of domestic violence. I've experienced police brutality personally, and I just...
Okay. I hear you,
with that.
Philip.
And
I mean,
I don't know, have you ever had police brutality, or have you ever been a victim of the police? No, you're white, you're privileged in other ways, so I just want you to understand where I'm coming from. I'm sorry. And I don't necessarily mean to
I just-
personalize you or, and
No.
make you embarrassed for any reason. It's been bothering me, and I wanted to get it off my chest, and I feel better, so.
no, I'm glad you feel better. I do think that, we all have our feelings about certain issues. And there's certain things that bother me, and that's, a lot more. But I think that I'm just asking you to judge the individual and to judge the police bureau. Philip, you've made a few statements, and this always concerns me that, that the police officers are this way or the police department's that way. And, I feel like there are some really bad cops in every city, and they need to be removed from the police force. But we can't throw them all into one group, and that's what makes it difficult for them to feel that they're
Right, no, and I don't try to say that all of them would do that or in generalizations for the whole, but
Okay.
legitimacy for transparency reasons as well as trust. One bad cop can be a bad seed. It can be detrimental to the whole force, because then they're setting an example for their peers, and it can grow. I'm just saying it can grow exponentially. And of course, no one is perfect. But I could say, if I were a police officer and I made a mistake, I would have to take ownership and accountability for that. But I'm just thinking, how the fuck can they sleep at night and feel okay and look at themselves and put on their packs and their discharge their weapon and just still feel like, I'm okay, I'm a good guy because I wear the suit.
Okay.
So,
If that happened to your son, I don't think that would happen.
No, we hear you. Okay, well, thank you, Philip. We appreciate your input.
okay.
Do you actually mind being filmed? Because I love making films. I love my YouTube channel, but these sometimes are good to refer to, but I could point it at the crowd or at myself, or sometimes I even point it at the paper. On this issue with the marshman choking, basically they investigated the whistleblower by sending the letter that divulged this for DNA analysis, because it wasn't Marshman who was implicated as the strangler child abuser. It was the whistleblower in the family who had come out with this. And I don't know how far they got with their witness intimidation, but that's not how things are supposed to work. Additionally, the story goes that Marshman came out about the strangulation, drywall, head smashing, bruising of his son's neck 2 days after being appointed chief, which, of course, we can't trust the mayor because he's so dodgy and lies all the time. But supposing this 2-day time span happened, that is very much more reputable than the 29-day, 30-day time span with the O'Day shooting. So one thing I see immediately is that in the wake of a tragedy, like a very severe thing, like we frequently dispatch grievance counselors to a scene of a school shooting or something like that. And I feel like what was not dealt with in this community is that people had a serious collapse of faith and trust, which I kind of started to see that you guys, R&W, became the fall guy for what had been a previous pattern and behavior that started before you with aggressive or passive-aggressive tendencies with the mayor that really escalated. And so I think in some ways because you guys don't go to city council meetings constantly, or I assume you don't watch the footage, there has been an escalating attempt to delimit speech that has now progressed towards massive malicious prosecutions of just about, I mean, like, any activist who walks into city council is victim to this egregious violence. So I think the strangulation issue with Marshman, I do know I pitched the Ben Pickering story to him. And part of why I like the Ben Pickering story is around the time that the city started saying, oh, we don't even need to be in this lawsuit because we're already making such drastic improvements. I was like, oh, that's cool. But here we are with a blind, brain damaged Coast Guard rescue, traumatic brain injury victim who's on the streets having his skull crushed by Carl Klunt and Cioetta in these really disturbing circumstances, including evidence destruction, where the video was actually wiped out at the bar. And the bar confided that when we were doing our own piecework, trying to piece it all together. And so what I felt was important as a case study is that a lot of us, some of whom know about different cases, we all have different experience levels where the statistical analysis is probably brilliant, but it can be both over our heads sometimes, and I think it can also just feel a little cold. And I think what was really missing from the first, are we in a year or two, is more human interface. And like, for instance, with everyone flipping out about the Bud Fearless David Keefe Davis controversy, to me, I was like, he's a human being. What's going on? Oh, he's Jewish. Like, oh, that's the worst thing ever. And I think I knew that David Keefe Davis had been clobbered by Michael Cohen, while Engstrom, who is the officer who also assaulted me, was assaulting Barry Stull. And I know Barry Stull. He goes to city council and gives about the same speech every time. And he's very smart. And he was so thrilled about the DOJ case. But city council wanted to exclude him, harass him, work him up into a state, like literally gaslight him in the chamber on camera. And then they take David Keefe Davis down November 25th of 2015, and then launch this, now it's like a 12-month prosecution of him. So I think taking what you began to see in the COAB meetings, I think in a sense the COAB meetings were in a larger context of what is happening in the city with the homeless crisis and such. I feel like I'm going on a bit long, but you kind of, I mean, because you're from Chicago, I think it's cool personally, because I think East Coast and West Coast have great things to offer. But I think in terms of what Mirla Vianney Riviera Perez, is that right, said, she was talking about issues with how the concept of mental illness is perceived. And at the original fairness hearing, I had brought up issues about medical anthropology and Foucault and like conceptions of madness. And you guys, I think in some ways, I was personally deeply offended by the article that was published in the Oregonian on about, I think it was the morning of the 29th or so, or 28th, that was saying, oh, mental illness is no excuse for bad behavior, basically. And the thing that I felt about it was that it seemed to, well, anyway, it just so happened that morning I got beaten up at city council. So it kind of, I didn't have much time to process it, but I felt like my riding in on my white horse from Astoria to try to help, because Vianney says, hey, maybe you could join the COAB and be on the board. I kind of got sold into the glamour of, oh, I live far away. I've been dealing with Ben's crisis for so long now. Nobody will help me. The whole system's failed me. So maybe I should get involved. And then I immediately get signed up to be a scapegoat, beat up and brutalized. And I still don't even know where my internal affairs investigation is going, because they're like going at a grinding pace. Like, it's been 4 months.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, if you might be able to summarize. I know you
talk for
I know
hours,
you
but
have
you're
a lot.
tired. No.
Well, everybody is, and I know they want to go home
other people want to
tonight.
speak. Sure.
And I would like to give, if Amy feels she may not want to respond to your comment about her letter in the Oregonian or not, but
well, the
because
thing that's missing is that there was brutality, 627, blood spilt on the floor of City Hall. That letter came out, and then I came down to try to help and negotiate for people that are apparently
Yeah.
rowdy.
So the timing wasn't good for you, but I think her letter is independent of any
But
single
it
event.
totally negated the aspect of racial bullying. And that racial bullying, like, I mean, I straight up asked Amy on the Skype connection, are you Jewish? Because to me, that seemed essential. Like, maybe people don't understand if they haven't taken a Jewish studies class. But to me, I was like, whoa, these people are getting paid like whatever, $1 million or something. And I'm just this little person with no money and a computer, and I can write an apology. I can say, David Keefe Davis, I'm sorry you were bullied. Cyberbullying is unacceptable. I don't want to focus too much on that, but I feel like the attitude of kind of being judgmental towards people's mental state when you're depriving them of the context of their larger work, which is surrounding homelessness, addiction, poverty, whatever, like issues.
Okay, so why don't we give Amy a chance, if she wants to make a comment, or she doesn't have to at all. And if anybody else, we want to give, is there anyone else that wants to say something real quick? Okay, we have 2 more people already. Amy, did you want to just say anything or not?
Well, I apologize if that offended you. That wasn't the intent. It was really trying to make a response. That certainly people with mental illness, people basically with different disabilities, all have the right to participate in this process. And I think that's very valuable that we engage people to participate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay to harass and bully other people. And there were people that were coming to the meetings that were feeling that way, that they were feeling that they were being harassed and were feeling fearful of their own safety when they came to the meetings. And then, so I think we need to separate the two different
That mental
Thanks.
illness needs to be separated from
I
any
think
kind of
maybe
disruption.
part of what I'm seeing too, my mom's nickname at the VA was the patient whisperer, because she was the one who, if they had a problem patient, they would just be like, get Ann can handle it. And for me, I felt like this deserves an intervention. This isn't as big and out of proportion as it seems. And that's why I felt like, I drove David Keefe Davis to the shelter to get his dog. His dog had just died. This was
We are not going to defend what Bud said, if that's what
no,
you're
okay,
saying.
that's good.
There's no
Because I
question
had
about
just
that.
found
That
out I
was
have
not
Jewish
excusable.
ancestry, like way back,
Yeah.
like 200 years ago. So
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, this is getting personal.
Yeah, and this had
Yeah.
nothing to do with that. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, I was curious about Chief Marshman. You sat there and said that it happened in the past and stuff like that. And I look at the Portland Police Bureau the way it is now. If it's all right to brutalize your son 10, 15 years ago, and you now all of a sudden people's cameras and cell phones are being stolen from the police, and it's not necessarily taken for evidence because the DA drops the charges. And then the police still don't want to give it back until you bug them to the point that they have to give it back. Okay, well, what's next? What are we going to excuse the police force next? Mm-hmm. Let's try sexual harassment. That's a good one. What about Kruger? He got, 3 complaints on sexual harassment? I think 2 of them he groped female officers. Mm-hmm. So, okay, we got that. Now, what's next? What are we going to do next? Okay, an officer goes around and sexually rapes a woman. Should time excuse that? If he molests a child, should time excuse that?
No, there should be no excuse for those. But those are criminal behaviors that should be handled by the court.
So is choking your son. That's a criminal behavior.
I think that one thing that if you went up to Chief Marshman and said, was that a good act? I don't think that he would say yes. In fact, I know he would say no, that was a mistake.
Okay.
Well, let me go on some of the other things, is that we look at very objectively right or wrong. we show in our report things that, while things are trending positively, we can point to specific things and say, this is good, this is wrong. In terms of Chief Marshman, that past incident, I don't think anyone would argue that's right. But through our experiences with Chief Marshman, we've seen a lot of things that show dedication to community engagement. We've seen a lot of things that show dedication to not only complying with the letter of the agreement, but the intent as well.
He's fired 4 police officers.
So
It doesn't matter. If it's like this, if we went to the state prison system, and we go, you're convicted 10 years ago. If you agree that you were wrong, we'll release you. What do you think our community? What do you think our state would do? What do you think our country would do?
we also look at the criminal justice system and the incarceration system, at least from my perspective, as one of rehabilitation, in that something was wrong, and that by admitting that it was wrong is possibly the first step, but that when you do something wrong, that doesn't damn you for life.
Okay. If an individual person does something, he's damned for life. If a police officer does something, he should be damned for life. There shouldn't be.
Well, not damned for life.
There shouldn't be a thing of, well, you're a cop, so we're going to excuse that.
I don't think we're here trying to excuse any behavior. In the situation that we're in, we're assessing compliance to the settlement agreement. Chief Marshman is currently chief, and we're seeing some good things that are happening. In terms of our role, we can't judge the past. First of all, we haven't investigated what happened, and it's not really our role. What we can say is what Chief Marshman has done, or the changes that PPB has made with him as chief, we can assess that. And that's really all that we can do here.
We could take someone from the state prison system that committed a felony 10 years ago, bring them out, make them chief, and they could do the same thing, probably even better. Does that mean that they should be excused?
I hear that, the public is very concerned about this. I don't think we're in a position where we can excuse or not excuse. All we can do is assess the job that he's doing now, and that is our role.
A police officer should be held to the same standard as everyone else.
That principle I agree with. Yes.
Okay, then why is it the chief should be excused from what he did 10 years ago?
I don't think we're excusing him. Yeah, we're not excusing him. We're not in a position of trying him, convicting him. What we can do now is assess the job that he's doing now, and that's really all we can do.
That's our job. You guys, in the court of public opinion, we can say whatever. You guys can decide that. But our job is to decide what kind of job he's doing right now.
Right, but when you sit there and say, well, that was 10 years ago, or
I'm
however
not judging
long,
him. We started 2 years ago.
or however long that was, but now he's doing good.
We're only judging him on what he's doing since he took
Right, and we're not judging his personal life at
We
the
don't
moment.
care.
So
It's
we're,
not
we're
our
judging
job.
his job as chief.
A police
If it
officer's
turns out-
personal life is their job.
But
They're
for the
on
period that we're
duty
assessing,
24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
for the period that we're assessing, all we can assess is the job that he's doing as chief.
I also,
What about? I just wanted to clarify, I think perspective here, what's going on is that I think we're not asking you, yes, we understand you don't condone this behavior, but that's not, it's just the issue. The issue is also that I want you to recognize police culture and how someone can see something happen that's wrong and turn a blind eye and do not have accountability for each other. That type of behavior. That is police culture, and it allows it to grow and develop over time. So I think that's what the concern is here, police culture.
And we can,
That the trust is broken, and that people are frightened, and there is no transparency, and there are a number of issues there. We're not saying that you're wrong for not saying anything about his behavior 10 years ago, or your decision that you made about his behavior. We're just saying, recognize it, acknowledge culture, and acknowledge that the negativity grows, and the historical past.
Right.
I guess that's all.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to say.
And absolutely,
we totally understand.
what we can comment on is, and we do to some extent, the O'Day issue, which Obviously, it was handled very poorly. It was a huge blow to any progress that had been made to public trust. And
Right.
we
O'Day's gone. He'll never be a cop again in the state of Oregon.
Right, and actually, we just found out today he was charged with a misdemeanor for that case. That I have no other
Right.
information on that.
That means he'll probably never be a cop in this country
Right,
again.
right.
But what about the other dirty cops that are out there? The ones that other cops don't turn in and don't cover up.
And that's something that we hope
This
to
is
be
my
able
favorite
to
topic.
continue to work with the Bureau to address that, because yes, that's absolutely critical that that's addressed.
Those cops do the most damage to the whole Bureau. And we have pointed that out, and we will continue to point that out. And I think that it would be good for the community to continue to point that out. And
Okay.
so,
I'll give you a good example. Me and Mike ran into we seen a police car. We filmed the police, and it was at this church. All the lights were out. There was no light on in that church. We literally walked all the way around that church. There was no light on. We sat at the front door and waited. Right, this officer and this female cadet, which is the equivalent of an Explorer Scout, right? Between the ages of, I think, 16 and 18, walked out of that church. Now, you should have seen the looks on her face when she seen us, and the looks on that officer's face. Now, the Portland Police Bureau goes, oh, that's just a place where they do paperwork. How do you do paperwork when there's no lights on in there? He didn't have his computer in his hand. He didn't have any paperwork in his hand. What were they doing in a church with no lights on?
well, that we can't pass judgment on that. And if there's a need to file a formal complaint, that should be done.
Right, if it's what you're alluding to that it was, if that's what it was, that's horrible, must be addressed. But to comment on the specific circumstances.
I've addressed it to the Portland Police several times, and they go, well, that's just the place where we do paperwork. The question is, what is a female cadet, a minor like that, with an officer in a church that's all blacked out with no lights on?
Where is the church?
162nd,
And what?
between Stark and Division.
So I think what you're asking is, how do you look at that? The first question is has a complaint been filed? The second question is there a policy in place saying that officers and the female cadets should not be together alone? I don't know the specific circumstances of the event. I don't know all of that, but if there are systems set in place, like IPR and IA, to look at that, then we'll look at whether those functions have occurred as they're designed to be. But other than that, we can bring up, I'm sure, 1,000 instances where the circumstances are unknown, but in terms of systematic approach,
If you
we're
did
looking
the
at all
same
that
thing,
stuff.
if you did the same thing, and you told the cop, I'm just in there doing paperwork, and there's no paperwork in your hands, there'd be a criminal investigation.
Well, and it plays into the Matt Hennessy scandal where Mayor Hales cavorts with this fellow who admits that he raped his 12-year-old female relative, and he tried to get some activists up into a church, and they felt offended by that. So even within the police reform community, some people are like, hush, hush, like Roger Hardesty, the fellow who was arrested today. He's like, oh, this is a character smear, or it was a long time ago, like the same old story. But to me, if you want to have an atmosphere that's family-friendly and truly inclusive, people don't want to bring their children to an event in a church with a child molester who really ruined this woman's life. And similarly, with the issues that Bob is bringing up,
We hear what you're saying, and we're not going to condone if what you're implying is going on. Obviously, it's wrong, and I think the bigger issue, is there a double standard in policing? Are the police allowed to get away with things that the average citizen is what you're saying?
Then time shouldn't you shouldn't sit there and say, well, that was then. now's now.
But we don't know, I don't have any facts about that, and that should have,
Right.
if that was really what you guys claim it was, why wasn't it prosecuted? You're saying it was because he was a cop. I mean, we don't want to get into that right now because we are not going to pass judgment on individuals' cases. We are going to review how things are handled from the day we were hired.
What about having a
We've
police
actually-
force
we've
for
got-
women?
We've
We have
got
more
one more
people.
person. We've
But-
got Laura Vanderlyn who
awesome.
would
Yeah,
like to speak.
but just like generally speaking, when you've got like a domestic violence perpetrator who's also stalked his exes using his police powers and privilege, could we have a civil rights act that is applicable to women as full human citizens who deserve acts, as we suffer femicide and domestic violence and stalking and all these things? Marshman's not a guy I'm going to. If that ever happens to me again, I'm going to find alternatives, and the police would be the last person I go to. And so I feel that's a huge deficit, not really addressed in the settlement agreement, but perhaps it could be addressed in the future soon,
We
ASAP.
hear you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mayor.
Sorry about the delay.
Oh, that's fine. I appreciate that people are like allowed to speak a little bit longer than usual. I also appreciate, and for the record, I'm Laura Vanderlyn, artist Laura Vanderlyn, and I do also appreciate that there are no police here tonight. I think it's a little bit vulgar to enter a public meeting and have police lined up on the outside of a room and within the walls of the room. And I was there the other day at the at City Hall, and first I was there on the October 5th, and I was arrested that day, almost in exactly the same manner I was arrested here as I was leaving. Actually, I wasn't really part of the whole, I wasn't called out. I was leaving, I was calling my attorney, and I had exactly the same way as here, just so that you have an understanding of what my experience was. When I left this building, I was by the stairs, I had like 8 police officers chasing me. The first time I've been arrested here. The first time I ever made a public commentary was at the COAB meeting at the Charles Jordan Center. That was the first time. And I made that public commentary inspired by Judge Dominguez. He inspired me to engage. And I agree, it's important. And I know that a lot of times I say things that you don't agree with and that you don't like. And speaking robustly is not violent. I'm not a violent person. I am a nonviolent protester. And I was arrested. I'm still not understanding why. I think because people got offended and that got their egos hurt.
Laura, would it be fair to say, I mean, one of the messages I seem to be hearing, not just from you, but today, is that at a minimum, you're saying the police are mishandling not just protests, but any kind of...
I think I think there's a leadership deficit. In other words, there's nobody, I kind of feel like there's nobody has given me the respect to come up to me, walk up to me, and tell me, Miss Vanderlyn, you need to leave or you're going to be arrested. With any type of authority. I've not experienced that. Instead, I get people coming from behind me, grabbing me.
You don't feel they're handling the situation well?
No,
Even
I
if you
don't.
were-
It's not that I feel. I know that they're not because there are absolutely no charges against me.
Okay.
So if there was some kind of legitimacy to my arrest, I think I would be going to trial.
So it's the disruption of meetings in particular that we're talking about. It's not just you. We're talking about the
I
way
think-
those things are handled. Is that the issue?
I think that a lot of times, especially in the COAB meetings, and also in the city council meetings, it's the chair that is disruptive and disrespectful to
Okay.
the public, which causes the public that causes public outrage. And that outrage doesn't mean violence, and that outrage doesn't mean arrest. It just means outrage, and then it's time to listen. And I think that's the part that's missing. You know, I was arrested. I've never really seen or really paid attention very much to Mike Marshman, but that day he was up and he's outside. I have an image of him with his fingers like this, pointing and ensuring my arrest.
I'm pointing at you.
Yes, ensuring my arrest. Now, listen, it frightens me to know, and I understand that you are looking at his work because you're professionals. I'm looking at him, a person, a man, who has the ability to choke his stepson. There are a lot of people that are, I never had to share my children with a stepfather or a stepchildren, but that's frightening. It's frightening to think that, you know, I have grandchildren, they have a stepfather. That frightens me to no end. I would want somebody that choked my son or my grandson or my daughter to go to jail. And if he's a police officer, to have their badge taken away. I think that's a fireable offense. Not only did he do that, he stopped women with his uniform on. That's frightening. He was a person that sat in this room for 2 years. And it's misogyny if you don't see the offense to women.
We hear you.
You know, I just really want to go back to community engagement. One thing that Judge Dominguez did that I thought he did a great job doing was he just would meet people at libraries. He didn't meet people at churches. I kept trying very hard with Jimmy Johnson and I think it was, I want to say that it was Laquita and also Merlavania. They had invited me, all three of them, very nice, invited me to come to community engagement. I really wanted to be a part of that, but I told them 3 different times, 3 different people, I cannot invite anybody to go to that meeting. I cannot invite any of the people that are part of my organization, which I'm a part of, Don't Shoot Portland. I cannot invite them to a police precinct because the people that I would be bringing are people that are hurt by police and are triggered by it. And they didn't seem to understand that because that was the place that was selected to have those meetings. And I think that's very disrespectful. You know, and I'm not saying that they are disrespectful, but the whole process is kind of vulgar to think that people should be able to come there. I think that those places are like, I feel very uncomfortable going to, I've been to a few meetings there, and I just would rather not go there.
Can I ask you something, Laura, about that? Because, you know, I know this was a bigger issue early on in the COAB and about going to police stations. And I know Dan has objected to it and others. And but I get a little concerned. It sounds like Philip, though, wants to be engaged. But I don't know if he feels the same way. But do you feel that it's that you could actually work with the police in any capacity to
Absolutely.
that you could work with them? You could
Absolutely.
sit down at the table as long as it wasn't in a police station.
Yeah, I don't
Is there
necessarily
like-
know if I want to, at this point, if I can, I don't really, to be completely honest, I don't know.
Yeah, because I worry about, one of the things I feel when I come out here is there's a group of folks who have had really bad experiences with the police, and they're so upset about it that I have trouble visualizing them working cooperatively to come up with new ideas about inside or outside the police department. Maybe, Philip, you've wanted to address that because you wanted to have a better relationship.
Was just arrested.
Oh, no, I know that. I mean,
And you're asking her to go to a police station. She was just arrested. I mean, how could she feel comfortable?
Well, I understand that.
And
I'm just
I just
talking
would
more
really like
generally
to
about
talk-
other
yeah,
people and your friends and, you know.
Yeah,
the
see.
community.
I think that it's very difficult. I don't think that a lot of my friends would not want to speak to police. I just think being in a place like that feels like a trap. You know, it just definitely feels like a trap.
Yeah.
You know, I was like considering not coming here at all if I had seen somebody in a vest outside. I was
Yeah.
going to turn around and leave.
Yeah.
You know.
It's traumatic, actually.
Well,
yeah.
I have to tell you my experience. I have not felt like there's any respectability or I just think they lose, what's the word that you use, legitimacy when you grab somebody and you come at them from behind.
Yeah.
You know, like when I was leaving here, they came up to me from behind. Nobody told me why I was being arrested. Nobody. And then when they finally let me out, like all of my stuff was stolen and taken to a police warehouse.
That was from you disrupting a co-op meeting? Was that
That
what
was
it
from the co-op meeting, but that was the same experience I had at the city hall. I had all of a
Okay.
sudden, you know, I'm like being rushed upon, and I don't understand why can't somebody just come and have a conversation with me. I don't think that you're afraid of me. I don't think that you're afraid of me. You know, so I don't really understand why the order for me to be arrested happened after I left. It's not like the meeting continued because I went, when I got home, I watched the meeting and the meeting never happened because it was chaotic from the moment we entered the room.
Right. No, that's...
You know,
well,
and
wow.
I have not yet heard an apology for any of it from all of you, and I think that is probably a good way to bridge over to actually having real community engagement. You have red, non-compliant on the community engagement. You know, I tried very hard for a long time to get a settlement agreement on audio, or tried to get a process of how to do it. And the only thing I came up with months and months and months later of being given the runaround by Mandy Hood. I think Mandy Hood tried for a minute, but she realized that she couldn't, and then she started giving me the runaround, which I kind of did the exercise knowing already that I wasn't gonna actually get to the end and actually get a settlement agreement on audio. I don't know, but I cannot read a 77-page report. And I don't think you want me here not knowing that report at every meeting.
Oh, we appreciate
Because I hear you guys say that all the time. Like if you read the settlement report, that's so unfair. There's a lot of people that can't see. There's a lot of people that have dyslexia is a real thing. And I've been saying that for a long time. And I feel like it's just falling on deaf ears or non-caring ears.
Yeah. Well,
You know?
we work with the city. It's their job to do that, so...
Right.
Yeah.
See, and that's where, to me, it's like that's a point of confusion. I walked all over downtown. I walked all over town. Went from one building to another. Try this place. Maybe they can help you. Try that place. Maybe they can help you. Try that place. Then I came all the way full circle back to the beginning, which is the, I don't know, the equity, but I can send you the meeting. I was at a meeting where I first asked that question, where somebody else asked it. I think somebody from Portland, Cop Watch, which I was glad that they asked because I had been wanting to ask that question. And it's like a runaround from the very beginning. I'll be happy to send you that link.
No, we believe
You know,
and
but I
you
think
shouldn't
if
have
you
had
go
to do
back, I thought your presentation in February I think it was February, March that you did on stigmatization. I think you should keep talking about that. And I don't know, but I don't think that you guys know that you do that. You gaslight and you stigmatize. And I'm not saying that to judge you, or I'm trying to be completely honest with you. You know, that's what you're doing, and that your editorial felt like a big gaslighting because that was done after I got arrested, after my mug shot, where I've never been arrested. I am not a violent person. I think if you're being violent, maybe that's a good reason to arrest somebody, but not for being robust, speaking robustly, which I was within the guidelines of Ellen Osinich's rules, and the same way in City Hall.
I just want to,
Yeah.
first of all, this is really good, and I'm hearing everything you're saying, and I'm really glad that we have if you listen to us, we have some feelings too about coming out here and working really hard to want to have a meeting and then having no way to have a meeting repeatedly. Do you know what I'm saying? So we have another side to that. Even though it's nothing personal about you.
It's the same
just a
thing.
group of-
I don't want to waste
Yeah.
my time and come here and
Right.
not
We
actually.
travel long distances and we want to come here and then.
I do too.
So it's frustrating.
And I
is all
have
I'm
absolutely
saying.
no money. At least you're
Yeah.
getting paid.
And
I get
yeah.
no money at all.
No, I hear you.
None at all.
And I also want to defend
know.
Amy. I mean, Amy Watson is an internationally respected authority on mental health. She has written about, she's probably one of the leading experts in the country on stigma, and she fights against it, and she talks about it and writes about it. And I don't think it's fair to say that let's just say there was a misunderstanding in what she was saying. She was trying to separate protesting from mental illness and not confuse them or use them as one excuse.
Happy to mention
I can appreciate that,
Yeah.
but I'm telling you.
that it felt like I was.
It
being-
felt like
No,
stigma.
I was being gaslighted. I mean, when I go all over town, right? I hear people talk. They don't necessarily know that it's me, but people are talking about the co-op disruptors. That's vulgar because I'm a public member. I'm not a disruptor. My life is disrupted when I'm put in jail. My life is disrupted when I'm being
Sure.
disrespected and I come to a meeting and I'm being cut off and then Kathleen Sadat is trying to dismiss my commentary, or minimize my commentary.
I think
Yeah.
some of
So
it
that's disruptive. That's very disruptive.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure, Dr. Rosenbaum, I talked to you one day at one of the meetings, and I did complain to you. I tried to tell you how I was feeling about Kathleen Sadat.
Yeah.
Like, I have nothing personal against her. I just don't think
Yeah.
that she qualified for the job. And I tried to tell you that, and you brought it back to me, and you said something about civility. It's offensive.
Well, it goes
You know?
both ways, don't you think? I mean, Judge Simon, a great guy. We all share a lot of his values, but there's no disrupting his courtroom. I mean, how do?
Listen to it. He didn't argue with what we were saying.
Yeah, but
He didn't argue with what. That's the key.
okay, I hear you.
You're arguing. You're doing exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Laura's saying it's happening. That you, as the people of power, when you take your position and spend your time arguing with the community about what they said, that's very,
No, we're
you have the last word because you're in power.
no,
Just
we
say,
don't.
okay,
But
I'm just advising.
yeah.
Thank you. We'll take that under advisement.
Yeah, well, that's what we've said most of the night. I'm just trying to also share some of our
I think you've been
feeling. We're trying-
defensive, and I
Yeah.
am not.
Yeah.
I don't want to judge you, but if you really are trying to, I just kind of feel like I'm micromanaging. I was a flight attendant. I don't think that very many people know that about me. So I do know how you have to have leadership to be a flight attendant. I know that, and that's like the one thing that I do notice about police officers is that there's nobody taking command of a situation, right? Like when I was a flight attendant, there was a first officer and a captain, right? When they fly, somebody always has the wheel. If somebody can't handle it, the other captain, the other pilot, whichever one, whoever will say, "I have the wheel," and the other one lets go
Sure.
because.
So what are you saying about
But that's
trying
just
that
trying
analogy?
to say, just like, I just kind of feel like there's like a conspiracy to make yourselves legitimate, but you can't make yourselves legitimate if there's no leadership. And leadership means knowing when to take command of a situation, and you didn't take command of a situation with Kathleen Sadat, because there were many complaints about Kathleen Sadat. It wasn't just my complaint.
Well, but there were also many people, I hear you, and there were some complaints, but there were also many people who liked her and thought she was doing a good job.
Many people complain. You have
Yeah.
board members that felt harassed. I won't name.
I know.
I won't
I know.
name
We
the.
don't
I
have
won't
to
name the
relive
co-op
this.
members.
And we-
But there were maybe a half of the co-op members that I spoke to
Yeah.
that felt like they couldn't get anywhere. And it's the ones
Okay.
that have remained. The other ones kind of bailed on you already.
All right.
So, thank you for your time.
No, thank you very much.
Actually, thank you for coming and sharing all of that.
That
And,
was helpful.
sometimes if we disagree, we feel like we need to correct some things, but I think what we really need to do is listen to your experience and how it's been, and, you know, maybe some things we can change based on the feedback we get, and we certainly have to listen so that we can make those changes moving forward. There's some
I
things
just
we
think
may-
you should probably just go back and look at the meetings, listen to the meetings, and particularly the one in February where you're talking about stigmatization. I think it's February, March. At the end of that, Kathleen Sadat does exactly what you say not to do. And she does it to me. I felt very attacked that day.
But
You know.
we're moving on now, too.
Yeah.
It's not with the co-op.
I understand, but you're still kind of stuck with the idea that you're kind of not. I don't think that you're completely owning up to the problems that really existed, you know, that caused outrage with the community. And that's all I'm saying. Just take a little bit of time, breathe, and then go back and look at the meetings and see where you can make those changes. I don't think it's that hard to do.
And Laura,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I want to say that what you're saying right now is important, and as we're going with whatever the next form of community engagement is, the lessons that were learned from the past 2 years, you're 100% right. They have to be looked at. They have to be evaluated for what was good, what was bad. Let's keep the good. The things that didn't go so well, what happened and why did it happen? And let's learn from that, and let's really make that second part of it. However it looks, it has to use those things to be incorporated into it. So I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
I don't want you to feel worthless. We're not really focusing on the report, and I don't think, you know, that, I think your responses are good, and I do want to say thank you for your work, and I know that there isn't enough time to go over all of this, and there isn't many people here tonight. I think that just tonight was a really good opportunity for us to engage, so I'm really thankful for that opportunity. And I just want to clarify that talking about different specific officers isn't an attempt to target them. It's trying to explain why the trust isn't there, those foundational reasons for why trust is broken. It's not the intention, it wasn't my intention to particularly blame those specific individuals. I'm just talking about systematic issues and highlighting those as issues. So I just wanted to verify my intention. But thank you for the opportunity to come tonight. And I really thought this was great, and I thought we had a good communication.
Time to call. Can I just say one other thing? I don't think it's a meeting without Kale's sweet wisdom. You haven't spoken yet, and I always look forward to it.
All right, she's the last one, I guess, right?
No, not the, we have
No?
one other
One
person
other,
that had
Anne.
their hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry,
Ann?
yes, hi. Okay, and then you're the last person, then we'll all go home. Thank you.
The thing that's on my heart this evening is to tell you a story. It's a true story. Ted and I attended a meeting of the Jimmy's outreach, community engagement. And we, as usual, listen, because that's what we're here for, to learn. And a black police officer who happened to be in civilian dress talked about being offended by the community that preferred that police officers not show up fully armed and wearing vests. And so she waxed quite poetic about how proud she is of her uniform, of her job, her commitment, and so forth. And I thought that was a wonderful thing for her to be saying. But there came a moment when she demanded to know, what is that white couple from Southwest Portland doing here? I thought it was a rhetorical question, so I didn't answer. And then Kathleen insisted that it was not rhetorical. Some other people joined in and demanded to know, what is this white couple doing here? And I honestly didn't know how to answer the question. So I began by saying that in 1947, the Quakers won a Nobel Peace Prize. And it wasn't the denomination, it wasn't the service committee, it was the Quakers. And the reason they were awarded that prize is because anonymous Quakers have given support to equally anonymous neighbors in the practice of neighborliness and friendliness. And Kathleen pretty much interrupted me and said, but the Quakers are not interested in this issue, which I agreed with, it's true. But my only retort was to say that as long as Ted and I are attending these meetings, then the Quakers are here. I would never have told this story had I not been in the courtroom all day and with all of you this evening. Because what actually happened was, as I spoke, tears ran down my face. Because our situation with one another is so awful that we can't see each other as good neighbors and good friends. That's how I see everyone. I don't believe it's necessary for you to defend anyone. I think it's sufficient for you to simply take note that these things happen. I have been impressed with your courage, Amy, and your kindness in sharing with us, because you've been my teacher. I appreciate that. You too. You are the sweetest thing around.
Next to you.
And Dr. Rosenbaum, thank you so very much for your hard, diligent work. The point that I want to make is this. I can forgive every insult that every police officer ever threw in my direction. I can. But that's not what we're here for. The community is here for justice, which is bigger and better and more difficult. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very good.
I feel bad for Ann Brayfield. Do you want to follow that?
No. I did want to ask a couple of questions based on what I think Amy talked about in court today, because I wanted to understand better
Yeah, I didn't get much time.
the Memphis,
Yeah.
about the Memphis plan.
Mhm.
And I was hearing things about this being a hybrid, that, but this is the first time I'd ever heard why it was a hybrid. So were you saying that because of where Portland came into this and had done some work,
Right,
that it wasn't like starting at zero, so it was kind of a recognition perhaps of some of the work that has been done? I mean, whether that's been sufficient or not, I don't know, and that's one of my questions. But is that kind of what you were saying, is that where
Yeah.
they came in, it wasn't like we're going to expect
the exact same thing, right? 'Cause
Exact same
Memphis
thing?
model is that there's officers that volunteer to go through specialist training, they become
Yeah.
CIT officers, and then they're supposed to, anytime a call is identified as being mental health related, a CIT officer is sent. In Portland, since before the settlement agreement came in, all officers received a floor of 40 hours of training. They're starting at a different place than Memphis was in 1988, where, again, I don't know exactly what their training was, but across the country, I mean, it was really like 3 hours. And it wasn't really mental health specific. So the floor was pretty low. So once Portland started looking at what they needed to do, they wanted to retain a specialist component of officers that volunteer to take on more mental health calls. Because you don't want the officer that is just really doesn't have any interest in responding to mental health calls assigned to those calls. It's probably the less empathic, less compassionate person. But they had to figure out what the criteria would be then to dispatch the ECIT officer. And so they started with a fairly narrow criteria that was different from Memphis, and they broadened it a little bit, but it's still not all mental health related calls. And there's some thinking that maybe it shouldn't be all mental health related calls, just as a capacity issue. And given the fact for calls that aren't really crisis calls, that perhaps non-ECIT officers do have some of the basic capacity to manage those and to know when to call an ECIT officer in. Do we know if what they've done is sufficient? No, we don't know that yet, because we haven't been able to look at some of the data that could help us see kind of where they're at in terms of, do they even have enough ECIT officers to meet the demand for their current criteria? So that's one piece that needs to be looked at. Then, of course, the bigger picture is what's the impact? Are they providing effective response when they go, whether it's an ECIT officer to one of the criteria calls or it's a non-ECIT officer going to a call that's outside of the criteria? They're getting systems in place that should help us look at that. So again, we can't say they're all the way there and fully compliant, but they're in the process of getting to the point where we can actually assess.
You can look at
Right.
data.
Right, and I know the Memphis model, I mean, they can't go back to having most officers without the 40-hour training, because they already have it, and that's not a bad thing. It just, clearly, when they moved to training everybody, that model wasn't working for Portland either. It didn't create the better outcomes that they had hoped for. So it's a movement in process that I think the Portland model could be what really works for Portland. I think as we get data in, we'll figure out what parts of it are and what parts of it aren't.
And whether the criteria stay here or this criteria.
Right. Expands to anything mental health related. And then that assumes that then BOAC's able to identify them, those calls, and get officers to them. I mean, the other issue is even in Memphis, they don't always get a CIT officer to a mental health call. The goal is 100%, but it doesn't always happen. But again, the goal is to make sure you're getting officers, the right officers to the calls, as close to 100% as possible.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And there's this other dilemma you've pointed out, which is the settlement agreement says you must do the Memphis model.
Right.
Right.
And
Yeah, I
DOJ
know,
was
that's what-
writing the city saying, you have to do Memphis. And Portland's like, we're already doing more than Memphis. And Amy said that too. So there's that.
Well, at first they thought more than Memphis was just training everybody, but that's not more than Memphis, because then you lose sort of that specialist, the people that really want to build their skills and provide effective response. I think there's that piece of Memphis that they now have with ECIT. Again, it's more of an issue of exactly what is our capacity, what is our criteria to really make sure that we're doing the best that we can.
Criteria seems to me to be important.
Right, right.
How much capacity will there be for you to be able to look at what happened last November at the hospital with a person in mental health crisis who ended up getting shot and killed? I mean, are you going to be able to look at that situation? Is it ever going to be not being litigated or whatever, or investigated or something? I mean, are the public ever going to know, understand what happened there that day, really?
Well,
And
we haven't looked into that case. I don't know if DOJ is, but there's, as Dan and I have talked about, there's enormous lessons to be learned by starting at an event and backing up.
Yeah.
And looking at all the elements and seeing what happened.
Do we have access to those reports yet?
We can get access, but
I don't know whether we sorry. I don't know whether we have access to that report. I'm unaware whether the investigation has been completed. Dan? You would know, okay.
It's in the new police review board report that just came.
Okay.
Okay, so,
We do have access to officer-involved shootings. We've talked about those in our previous reports. We talked about it in this report, actually, in terms of steps that PPP has to take with those. So we have access to it.
That's a good
Yeah.
I think there's something about it that, yeah, I know it's one, and we don't
Right.
have 10, but one of the things that was concerning to me about that, among other things, that situation was that some of the very same officers and investigators and DA that were involved in November were also involved and had responsibility in the Keaton Otis case back in 2010.
okay, that would be
And
useful
to
to look
me,
at.
This goes to my,
there's gotta be something there to
To look at pattern.
to
And,
look at patterns and to notice.
and I know OAR has looked at some of that in their reports.
Their contract's over.
Okay.
oh, really?
No replacement yet.
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
But certainly, I mean, once we have access and we can look at the patterns of how the investigation's handled as well, is one of the big pieces we're looking at.
Well, I think that case, those two cases are very important because
Yeah.
we're gonna get this, looks like we're getting the same results, and we had the same investigators, and you know, it was uncanny to me to read through and to see, oh my goodness, there's so-and-so, oh my goodness, there's so-and-so, oh my goodness, there's so-and-so. I thought, am I surprised that the result was what the result was?
Yeah.
And is it that overall we haven't learned, or is it that certain individuals haven't learned? I mean, I don't know, but I think that's important. That's important to find out. So if you have the ability to look at some of that, I think that would be good.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
do. And we've been pressing them a lot in meetings lately about this issue of identifying patterns within officers
Yes.
over time.
Yeah.
Because I said that today, but it's like, you know, you don't have to have a massive database sometimes. You just have to say, these individuals seem to be popping up. I mean, you can,
Right, and ideally, we're recognizing patterns of less lethal force before you get to the point where there's a pattern of deadly
Lethal.
force.
Sure.
That's our entire, anytime we've talked about the EIS system, they're paragraphs 116 and 117. But that's how we see EIS functioning
Yeah.
for the PPB's benefit and ultimately for the community's benefit.
I think everybody's benefit, because
Correct.
honestly, if there's someone, if there's an officer who's got a problem, and it's showing up as a pattern and
Right.
so on, and it doesn't get dealt with, that's a pretty big downer for those people who are
yes.
doing their
Right.
job without this. So I think it's serving not only the non-law enforcement community, but I think it's,
Right,
you
their
know,
fellow
serving the
officers.
rank and file. And I think that's extremely important here.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes the whole rank and file is getting tarred
Absolutely.
with what a few people are doing that need to be
Right, and they're very,
found.
for the most part, the rank and file that aren't doing those things are very frustrated
Yes, they are.
with their colleagues
Yeah.
And
that
we'll-
are.
And then they have to hear from the community who may not be distinguishing.
Right.
And then here we are, we're not listening to each other, and we're filing complaints against each other and doing all kinds of things that take us way off the track of,
Yeah.
be here now, together, we're all humans, we gotta figure this out.
We'll keep looking at that, and, you know, in these reports, you will absolutely continue to see the progress that's being made towards that.
I think also the EIS issue and looking at those patterns is going to be a focus
Yep.
as we're moving
Yes,
forward.
I do too,
mean,
and what's our timing gonna be here? I mean, I'm not, you know, saying, okay, it's gotta happen like this, but are there deadlines for some of this?
Well, we have had meetings this week with them about some of these issues, and we are pressing pretty hard that they look for patterns. And there's been some back and forth about that,
I bet.
and we are not giving up on that because we pushed that before and it didn't
Yes,
really go anywhere.
didn't go.
And so we are, they are bringing in new people. They are putting more resources into this. So there's more staff working on these things, and we've encouraged them, for example, I did yesterday or the day before, to have a group of officers get together and talk this through, because one thing we've learned from other places is that the officers on the street, they actually have more insight about who these officers are than we do.
Yeah.
And it varies
Okay.
by city. In some cities, it could be a certain pattern, but they know who they don't want to ride with and who, every time there's an encounter, things escalate. They know who those officers are. And it's not a matter of pointing people out so much as supervisors learning from this knowledge. And in some cities, they've learned, it's like, I was mentioning this today, sick days. How does that relate to anything? Well, after they've been out, something's been going on, or there's problems in their life, whatever, but it relates, there's pattern, all of us are human beings.
Yeah,
And our
yeah, no
behavior's
kidding.
not random, it's
No
predictable.
kidding.
We all have predictable patterns, for better or worse, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so, I think they're gonna take this seriously, hopefully they will, and, cause they want, like you said, it's also a way to save officers' careers ahead of time. I mean, they see the benefit of that, like, you don't have to wait till this guy, 5 strikes and you're out kind of thing. You can intervene early. Good supervisors use the data and use all this information, and that's what
And
we're pushing.
supervisors supervise.
Yeah,
Right, they
exactly.
And I
coach,
think
they make sure there's
you're
remediation.
talking about the tools,
Yeah,
but there has to be a willingness to supervise.
yeah, exactly. Well, and that's an
that's
understudied
hard.
area of policing is first-line supervision. That's a big thing.
Birkenbein was involved in the Aaron Campbell event. He was also the one who helped the beating footage of Benjamin Pickering at Ace Tavern be destroyed. And he I have the sound clouds of the court testimony on the Justice for Benjamin Pickering blogspot. But I found it very interesting because he was very questioned in the Aaron Campbell, and I think he was suspended for 2 weeks or something. Copwatch knows, but he was once again flubbing up and tripping over himself and lying in court, and it was very embarrassing because the judge on that case was Karen Immergut, and she was formerly in the position of Amanda Marshall when she wrote the settlement agreement. She was the top U.S. attorney. So for her to be in a lower level circuit court, she seemed to understand the scope, the severity, the nature, the ADA, how this applies, who this guy is, what his history was. So that would just be something to check out.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
This
Yes.
Thank you.
was very helpful tonight, and
Yeah.
I'm glad we had this dialogue.
Thank you
Wish
to
we could do
everybody.
this more.
This was good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
all for
Thank you.
coming. Have a good week.
And if people do have feedback on our report, you can send it to us by email,
It's on the website.
snail mail, yeah, you can go on the website. So if people want to send more along, we will incorporate, yes, we will incorporate it.
7 days at the end of the month.
Go Cubs.
Yeah, go Chicago.
We talked before about the history of why officers are trained 40 hours here?
Right.
Because it was after James Chastity, we were